Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Friday, April the 18th, 2025. Good Friday. Our reading is from the 23rd chapter of Luke, beginning at the 26th verse. As they led him away, Jesus, that is, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. Two others also who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that's called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "You saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you're under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we're getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light failed and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Tony Campolo is one of my favorite Christian writers, I guess you'd say. He was an academic. He was a professor of sociology, I think, at Eastern College outside of Philadelphia. He's also a Baptist preacher. And in his book, Let Me Tell You a Story, which is one of my favorites, he has a chapter entitled Time to Wrap Up. And he writes this: "There are a couple of special stories that constantly appear in my sermons. They've almost become signatures for my preaching. If any of my readers have heard me preach more than once, they undoubtedly have come across one of them. The first picks up the theme that carried us through the end of the previous chapter of the book. It's a story about hope in the face of despair. It's the promise of victory when we feel the pain of defeat. It's entitled, It's Friday, but Sunday's Coming." If you come to church this evening, or if you are able, I think we're live streaming it and recording it, if you're able to also access it in that way, there's a very powerful rendering of this at the end of the service. But I thought I'd share it with you this morning as well. Capola writes, "I belong to a black church in West Philadelphia. I've been a member of that church for decades. And for me, Mount Carmel Baptist Church is the closest thing to heaven this side of the pearly gates. I preach to a lot of congregations, but I have to say that no other group of people fills me with excitement like the congregation of my home church. People in my congregation always let me know how I'm doing. Whether I'm good or bad, they let me know how they feel about my message. Well, one time when I was preaching, I sensed no movement of the dynamism of God. I was struggling, as you have seen ministers struggle, seem to be getting nowhere. I had gotten about 3/4 of the way through my sermon when some lady in the back row yelled, 'Help him, Jesus! Help him, Jesus!' That was all the evidence I needed that things were not going well that day. On the other hand, when the preacher is really on in my church, they let him know that too. The deacons sit right under the pulpit. Whenever the preacher says something especially good, they cheer him on by yelling, 'Preach, brother, preach!' And I want to tell you that when they do that, it makes me want to preach. Well, the women in my church have a special way of responding when the preacher is doing good. They wave one hand in the air and call out to the preacher, 'Well, well.' Whenever they do that to me, my hormones bubble. But that's not all. When I really get going, the men in my congregation shout encouragement by saying, 'Keep going, brother, keep going.' I assure you, that you'd never hear keep going from a white congregation. They're more likely to check their watches and mumble, "Stop, stop." Well, one Good Friday, there were 7 of us preaching back to back. When it was my turn to preach, I rolled into high gear, and I want to tell you, I was good. The more I preached, the more the people in that congregation turned on, and the more they turned on, the better rather I got. I got better and better and better. I got so good that I wanted to take notes on me. At the end of my message, the congregation broke loose. I was absolutely thrilled to hear the alleluias and their cries of joy. I sat down next to my pastor. He looked at me with a smile, and he reached down with his hand. He squeezed my knee. "You did all right," he said. I turned to him and asked, "Pastor, are you going to be able to top that?" The old man smiled at me and said, "Son, you just sit back, because this old man is going to do you in." I didn't figure that anybody could have done me in that day. I'd been so good, but the old guy got up, and I have to admit, he did me in with one line. For an hour and a half, he preached one line over and over again. For an hour and a half, he stood that crowd on its ear with just one line: "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming." That statement may not blow you away, but you should heard him do it. He started his sermon real softly by saying it was Friday. It was Friday. My Jesus was dead on the tree. But that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. One of the deacons yelled, "Preach, brother, preach." It was all the encouragement he needed. He came on louder and he said, it was Friday, and Mary was crying her eyes out. The disciples were running in every direction like sheep without a shepherd. But that was Friday, and Sunday's coming. People in the congregation were beginning to pick up the message. Women were waving their hands in the air and calling softly, "Well, well." Some of the men were yelling, "Keep going, keep going." The preacher kept going. He picked up the volume still more and he shouted, "It's Friday." The cynics were looking at the world and saying, "All things have been, so they shall be." You can't change anything in this world. You can't change anything. But those cynics didn't know that it was only Friday. Sunday's coming. It was Friday, and on Friday, those forces that oppress the poor and make the poor to suffer were in control. But that was Friday. Sunday's coming. It was Friday, and on Friday, Pilate thought he had washed his hands of a lot of trouble. The Pharisees were strutting around, laughing and poking each other in the ribs. They thought they were back in charge of things, but they didn't know that it was only Friday. Sunday's coming. He worked that one phrase for half an hour, then an hour, then an hour and a quarter, then an hour and a half. Over and over, he came at us. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. By the time he came to the end of the message, I was exhausted. He had me and everybody else so worked up that I don't think any of us could have stood it much longer. And at the end of the message, he just yelled at the top of his lungs, "It's Friday." And all 500 of us in that church yelled back with one accord, "But Sunday's coming." That's the good news, says Campolo. That is the word that the world is waiting to hear. That's what we have to That's what we have got to go out there and tell the world's people. When they're psychologically depressed, we have to tell them that Sunday's coming. When they feel that they can never know love again, we've got to tell them that Sunday's coming. When they've lost their belief in the miraculous so that they no longer expect great things from God, we must tell them that Sunday's coming. We must go to a world that is suffering economic injustice and political oppression and tell them that Sunday's coming. The world may be filled with millions of hungry people. Half the planet may be under the tyranny of communist domination. Dictators may rule in Latin America. People may find their rights abridged, their hopes under attack. But I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, because to all of those who are on the brink of despair, I can yell at the top of my lungs, "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming." Amen. We'll see you again tomorrow. Till then, take care.